Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome. This is not a public hearing, but we are very excited that you all braved the winter deluge that is outside to be here for this important conversation. I'm Shannon Hart, and I have the honor of serving as the president of Columbus City Council. We are joined by an esteemed panel here to talk about an issue that is really important to everyone, not just young professionals, but to our community and to our country, about the weight of student debt and just neat ideas that folks have kicked around. I was telling the group independently that my office has wanted to have this type of conversation for a while, that we had worked with the Create Columbus Commission several years ago to study this issue, but sometimes government, and I'll own this, city government, we don't like to talk about things until we have it in a neat bowl and we're rolling it out to you. And that's not where we are today with student loan debt. This is a tough issue that we don't necessarily have city answers for. But we think, regardless, it's important for us to use our role as a convener to bring folks together, to explore, to kick around what this means for our community now, but what it will mean for Columbus of the future if we don't stack hands and explore ways to move forward together. So I'll start with thanking our partners. First, the Create Columbus Commission, who's been working on this issue for several years. The Columbus Urban League Young Professionals for joining with us and getting folks out and sponsoring this event. And then the Columbus Young Professionals Organization. We are very, very grateful for our partners. I also want to recognize Tim Fulton of the Create Columbus Commission, Nick Bankston, who is the new president of the Columbus Urban League Young Professionals, Derek Grosso of Columbus Young Professionals. So on behalf of my colleagues in Columbus City Council, thank you all for joining us for this fireside chat on student debt. Today in the United States, 44 million people owe over $1.5 trillion in student loans as average debt grows and wages remain stagnant. Research has proven that millennials are the most educated cohort in America, in American history, yet we have been forced to take out large sums of student debt. Recent data shows that an estimated 7 out of 10 students take out loans to get their degree and end up owing an average of $30,000 each. I am in that category, owing well over $30,000. And God willing, one of these days we'll pay it off. That's why we're here today, to have a discussion on a real topic that affects all of us. We have an amazing panel, and in the abundance of caution of me excluding something that is very important to each and every one of them and a descriptor of the amazing work they're doing in their community, I am going to ask them to kick us off by telling us who you are, what you do, and anything that you want to just get us started on this conversation. We'll start with Representative Boggs.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I am thrilled to be here with all of you. Thank you for coming out. This is an incredibly important topic. I am the state representative for Ohio's 18th House District. I am one of those young professionals that has been burdened with my own student loan debt. I graduated from law school with over 6 figures of student loans. That made it so that my student loan payment was more than my mortgage payment on my first home in Grandview, which wasn't cheap either. And so I feel very strongly that this is an issue that needs to be addressed. It impacts young people and their ability to plan for their financial future, their ability to participate in the economy, and every aspect of their life. Before joining the State House, I was at the Ohio Attorney General's office for about 10 years. And my first project while I was at the Attorney General's office was to do a student loan investigation into the relationships that our student lenders had with our universities throughout the state of Ohio. And it was amazing to me because we did this massive document review trying to understand what these relationships were between lenders and schools and borrowers and their borrowers' families. And there were about 8 of us attorneys that had just recently graduated from law school that were locked in almost a closet-type room trying to review, hundreds of thousands of pages of documents. And out of the 8 of us there, we all had student loan debt, and really none of us understood what we had just taken on financially. We did not appreciate the significance completely of the student loan world. Here we are, we were lawyers, we were practicing law, but we were learning more about what we had done to our financial future through reviewing these documents and looking at what the universities had provided us. And so I'm really appreciative that we're doing these events to educate people, to talk about this issue, and I look forward to hearing what my other panelists have to say.
Hello, everyone. Thanks again, Shannon, for having me. My name is Alfred Wilson. By day, I'm an auditor, and by night, I'm a financial blogger that goes by the name of Frugal Freddy. So, originally from Cleveland, I went to Mount Union College for undergrad, and I went to Baldwin-Wallace University for my MBA. And through that time, I accumulated over $150,000 in student loan debt. And more recently, I decided to document my debt-free journey on social media. So if you guys are on social media, please follow me at Frugal Freddy. But in all seriousness, this is one of the things that's really dear to my heart, because college is, the way to, success. But what the representative said, is one of those things that costs a lot of money. So one thing that I just, me and my wife has taken a stance on is showing the journey. Sometimes people, we're kind of weary to talk about this openly. And I think one thing that I've realized with me and us being transparent is actually has encouraged people to kind of eliminate their debt completely. And it's been a very rewarding experience. So thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alex Frohmeyer. By day, I work at a technology company based here in Columbus called Beam Dental. We provide dental insurance to small business. And by the nature of what the company does, providing employee benefits, I spend a lot of time thinking about and talking to small businesses who are increasingly starting to think about and solve student loan debt and debt repayment issues as a employee benefit opportunity, which is something that we'll probably circle back to at some point today. I'm here, though, representing the Create Columbus Commission, which, as Shannon mentioned, started and commissioned and successfully studied or produced a study a couple years ago in partnership with the Community Research Partners, or CRP, here locally, to take on this issue. First of all, illuminating it. What is student loan debt like on a national scale? A lot of information available on that front. But then we zoomed in on Columbus. What does this issue look like in Columbus? And what are some potential programs that can be created by or led by the city to help address student loan debt as a way to unlock economic prosperity? One of the main pillars of what the Create Columbus Commission spends its time doing is in economic prosperity, trying to understand and push forward either at a policy level or in local community movements, ways for us to, and by us I mean young professionals especially, but residents of Central Ohio, ways to better understand, get educated on, and provide for a happier and more fulfilled economic future. So one of the things that we'll circle back on today is some of what we learned in that debt study and what there is left to learn, which is much. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Dave Harrison. I'm president of Columbus State Community College. At night, I'm also president of Columbus State Community College. As I look around the room, I may be the token old professional that's part of this. But I want to thank President Hardin for convening this group on a really important topic, and thank you all for taking time out of your Saturday to do it. At Columbus State, we spend a lot of our time on this very issue, and we think that we are a big part of the solution. And when we hear about students who have made choices that could have been avoided had they known more options, that's something that we take personally. I was telling a couple of you spent my morning at Ohio State continuing to refine our partnership we call Preferred Pathway that really does provide opportunities for students to earn a bachelor's degree, saving 40% or more on the cost of tuition, and we've extended that partnership to 8 other colleges and universities in our region. It's not something that people know a lot about. A full-time student at Columbus State pays about $4,000 a year in tuition, and most of our students aren't full-time. I'll come back to this, but most of them are working. And then another important part of the debt equation is the job you get at the other end. As a nation, we've overplayed our hand with regard to the bachelor's degree being the only pathway to start your career. Bachelor's degree is more important than it's ever been, but not necessarily as the entry-level credential. And more employers are working with us for certificates and associate degrees that launch students on their career and then have their bachelor's degree paid for through employer tuition assistance. We think in Central Ohio especially, there is a lot of alignment from a public-private partnership standpoint that can address this issue, and I'm delighted to be part of the conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Harrison, and as you guys eat the latest brunch you'll ever attend, we'll jump right in. But write down your questions. We will kind of open it up. I'll ask a few questions, but we also want participation from you guys. So if you have a burning question, just raise your hand and I'll get to you. Let's start with Alex. All right, we started off talking about the study that Craig Columbus Commission did. Would you give us some background about the study, what we found, kind of give us a level set for Columbus?
Yeah, sure. So we started, so the Craig Columbus Commission has 33 commissioners, all young professionals, and we spend our time split up in a couple different areas. One of those is economic prosperity, as I mentioned earlier. So we had started focusing on a broad set of topics around prosperity and really narrowed down to and ended up focusing on student loan debt as one of the main issues affecting financial freedom and independence for young people in Columbus, but also obviously all over the country. So we raised some money from Lisa Ingram at White Castle and a couple other sources, both internal and external, to commission a study with the community research partners to explore the issue. Step one was let's understand the issue, and number two was starting to propose for Shannon, City Council, Mayor Ginther, et cetera, what are some ways that we can better tie together a better financial future for young people in Central Ohio, and what creates a successful program that can be sticky and help accomplish other goals that student loan debt may be inhibiting. One of those that we spend a lot of time talking about and thinking about inside the study is home ownership. It's a sticky way to attract and retain more people in Columbus, an already growing city, and more people that are going to be degreed, interested in setting down roots and building families and careers in Central Ohio, and can't maybe do that or do it as fast or as well as they would like to because of the effects of a huge student loan debt balance that they have to pay instead. So we looked and studied 4 different programs that have been instituted in other cities around the country, in Kansas City, in Maryland, in downtown Detroit, and in Niagara Falls, of all places, that have different, in different ways and at different levels, invested in tax credits, forgivable loans for renters and buyers of homes, and a couple flavors in between, setting aside slush funds in some cases, doing direct investments against loan payments on behalf of young professionals, all with this idea of, can we attract people to places like Niagara Falls? Can we retain people to places like Kansas City because we're helping not just provide a low cost of living or a great job, but also helping you pay down a huge student loan debt balance. What we found is that there is a massive amount of opportunity as long as there's political will in place to help turn the financial future of people in a very specific sense, but also it's a great, we've also reached out to young professionals in the Midwest to kind of test this. It's a great way to attract and market a city like Columbus that's already trying to build its profile regionally and nationally.
Alex, did you find the focus or the outcome being heavier on the attract and retain or on the debt reduction side?
Attract and retain. The number one thing we found in our study, people want to move to a place where there's going to be a great job because they, quite obviously in some ways, they want to have a great career. They want to build and produce, and they want to earn money. This isn't just about like I have $50,000 worth of debt, somebody save me from it. This is I want to go produce and earn and have a phenomenal career. If they can check that box on Columbus and say, yes, I can have a great career in Columbus, if there is a way to nudge that over the edge, because I could move to Chicago, or I could go to Miami, or I could go to the West Coast, having a student loan debt program, whether it's helping me buy a house and forgive a loan later, or just provide an offset to my city income tax, that's attractive for me to make the move to Columbus instead.
For this question, go to anybody, but what happens to a community if we don't act on student loan debt? Like what are what is the peril that we face as a community if we continue status quo with the overwhelming student loan debt that we have?
I can take that question. I think if we don't act, and I look at this more being a state representative through the state lens and what we see going on in Ohio. Ohio has is graduating students with some of the largest student loan debt in the country. We have unfortunately disinvested in higher education repeatedly since the 1980s. And I think that what you see is our young, educated, most talented are leaving our state, and they are going to where they feel like they can have successful careers that can also provide for the financial stability that they're seeking and can allow them to live and thrive in the kind of manner that they want to. And that means sometimes, because they have this financial debt, that they want to live in a city where they don't have to have a car payment, or they want to live in a city where they can have other less financial burdens from trading off, what we would consider in Ohio absolutely necessary items that they don't necessarily have to have in those cities. And that's a big motivation for them to move there. If they can, stay in Chicago and not have to pay a car, that might be what they need to cover their student loan. And so I think that this really has an impact on us keeping our young and talented in the state and attracting new and young talented to the state.
Dr. Harrison, are you concerned that because we now are talking about student debt more than I think that folks were talking about it when I was entering college, that it in itself will start to discourage folks from taking the step into higher education?
I think it already is. Higher education is not seen as the direct path to professional success as it was even a few years ago. In some ways, I think we need to look at that as a positive because it means people are more informed and they don't feel like they've got to take on more debt than they can afford because there may not be the payoff there. We're not at a tipping point in terms of that communication, but I think just starting the conversation is important. Put it in perspective, the housing crisis is really identified as the trigger point for the last financial crisis. And the national mortgage debt in 2006, 2007 was $1 trillion. I'm sorry, $1 trillion. And as President Hardin said, student loan debt is at 1.5 trillion now. So you look at the impact that's having on people's lives. People are at $30,000, they're in their 40s before they've paid off their own student debt at the very time that they should be putting money away for their children's education, not to mention that it's delayed mortgage investments and those kinds of things. So this really is a generational kind of thing. And especially in Central Ohio, bringing it more locally, we do have options. Representative Boggs is exactly right. Public policy matters, and the state of Ohio has underinvested, and there's a lot of data that show that. I was in Florida for 10 years, and the student debt data compared to Florida and Ohio, there are some direct policy implications that can show the differences. And then if you look at the economic impact and the diversity that states like Florida are starting to draw, including young people, public policy really does matter. Now, to the extent that can happen at a local level, no one can do it better than Central Ohio, because we've got more and better higher ed assets than any city in the country, and the ability to really mobilize it. And importantly, we're all working really well together, so there are ways that we can nudge that along to really help people in substantial ways, I believe.
Alfred, what does this mean to young professionals who have come to a community like Columbus? You say you're from Cleveland, but even more specifically to young black professionals who maybe are first generation college students or college graduates.
I would say one of the things, as everyone said, like the student loan is a burden sometimes, and we're trying to start our lives and try to own a home, but our mortgage is the same amount as our student loan payment. So there's some things that you got to give and you got to give or take. I think it's one of those things where at the end of the day, it's one of those things that, we have to figure out what's our why and then determine on how to do that. And I think that's the one thing for myself is just, what? My student loan debt is not going anywhere anytime soon. So what way can I help myself to eliminate that? So one thing that I've done, I got a part-time job. We start selling all the junk in our home to kind of make money off of that. So it's just trying to find innovative ways to get more money to minimize my personal student loan debt. So,
thank you. Representative Boggs, I know that I'd spoken with Senator Schiavone, who is exiting the Senate, termed out, but I know that he had been working on some legislation on the state house level, and I know you have worked on legislation in the state house. Can you talk a little bit about the state's role and kind of things that you guys are kicking around?
Sure. So the state is a huge funder of higher education, as we should be. And I like to tell people, the reason why the state should be incredibly supportive of investing in higher education is because I would challenge anyone in this room to think of a city across the United States that is growing and booming and developing economically that isn't attached to an anchor that's a higher ed institution. Our higher ed institutions have really become what our manufacturing towns were in the 1950s and 60s. I mean, they are what attract our workforce, our talent, and our jobs to our state and our cities. And so for that reason alone, I think it's incredibly important that we continue to invest in our higher education institutions. Unfortunately, my colleagues aren't the greatest investors in the state. And so some of us that are, especially the younger members of the General Assembly, have tried really hard to come up with some creative ways or just some relief to give to students that are dealing with burdensome student loans and student loan issues. So one of the pieces of legislation that I introduced this past year, and I introduced it with Representative Kelly, who happens to also represent the University of Cincinnati. It would essentially create a student loan ombudsman person within the Department of Commerce, and it would be paid for by creating the same and implementing the same regulations of student loan servicers as banks and other financial institutions have. So in Ohio, if you're just a student loan servicer and you're not affiliated with a national bank or a credit union, you virtually are unregulated in the state. And so what we were finding, and this was actually brought to my attention by a constituent who practices consumer law, we were finding that the student loan servicing companies were going after people who had defaulted on their student loans in Ohio, and they were providing service for notice of this default to the dorm that they lived in college when they first took out the loan, because that was their last known address. Not a lot of people who are paying on their student loans are still living in the dorm that they lived in when they first took that loan out. So these Ohioans wouldn't even know that that they had this service for their default of their loan until the service company then would go to the court and they would get a default judgment because the person wouldn't appear because they didn't know that they had to appear, and they would start garnishing their wages. And all of a sudden, they'd get their paycheck and it'd be $800 missing of it. And I don't know about you guys, but I would flip out if my paycheck was suddenly $800 short and I find out that I had been sued and had a default judgment against me. And so our legislation prohibits this really bad faith behavior from our student loan servicing companies, requires them to keep adequate and proper records of these individuals. They are not hard to find. There are many resources if you want to find a true address for someone that you know is working and living in Ohio. Obviously, they found them when they wanted to take their wages. And so by regulating these student loan servicing companies, we will create this position of a student loan ombudsman person within the Department of Commerce that then can be a true resource to borrowers. Because, like I said earlier, one of the things that I really became aware of when we were doing our student loan investigation is just there's no one that's really in that space that's a dedicated student borrower advocate. And so you can hire a private attorney to be your advocate. You can, if you have the money to do that, but again, that's not really the best course of action if you're someone that's trying to be fiscally responsible to just go out and hire an attorney to have some, just advice about what your rights are as a borrower. We as a state can create that position, and we can fund it through regulating these student loan servicing companies who have been a little unscrupulous in their behavior in Ohio. So that's just one of the things that we're trying to do creatively that isn't directly requesting additional financial state support to the universities, but we think can have an impact on helping borrowers navigate this student loan systems.
I just want to follow real quick. Alex used the phrase political will. Do you sense the political will at the state level? Like, is this a bipartisan issue or not?
No. I mean, I think that I would say that Representative Mike Duffy, who is one of the Republican members, has probably been the most active and interested in addressing this issue. But there is just, I hear this buzzword around the State House a lot that is, well, college isn't for everyone. And it's not. And I would not force someone to go to college who isn't going to thrive in college. But the reality is that we have more people, more high school students graduating with higher ACT scores than we did 10 years ago, and less high school students going to college than we did 10 years ago. And so to me that says we have more 18-year-olds that are graduating from high school that are ready, able, capable of doing really well in school, but they can't get there. And I believe a huge barrier to getting there is the financial barrier. And we're not doing them any good service by making it more difficult or more expensive to go to school. So I think that there is just the younger members on both sides of the aisle get it more, but there's not a lot of us.
Dr. Harrison.
How we define college and what we mean by college when we say college isn't for everyone or whatever is something that we really need to help people understand. 9 out of 10 new jobs that are being created require some form of post-secondary education. And education in the future of work, in the age of job disruption, is going to become not an event in someone's life, but something that happens continuously. And we've got, again, higher education assets in our state that are unsurpassed. So helping our policymakers understand that most college students in America and in Ohio aren't 19 years old. 25% of college students in America are what we would consider traditional. They start a residential university the year after high school. Most of their expenses paid for by their family. They're living on campus. They're going to school full time. That's 25%. That's not what's contributing to, that is part of what's contributing to student debt, but that's not what we should base our policies on. The state has made some good progress with regard to policy, not funding, and there's a difference, but the two can go hand in hand. One is policy that encourages 2+2 pathways to the bachelor's degree, where students finish their freshman and sophomore year at the community college and at our low tuition rates, and then go to the university for their junior and senior year, like my friend Brandon did, between Columbus State and Ohio State. And then the other is a program called College Credit Plus, which allows high school students to take college coursework while still in high school free of charge to families. And that's something that really has accelerated. The issue with that is that has been disproportionate with regard to equity. So in some ways, the students who need it the least with regard to College Credit Plus are accessing it the most. That's a problem we can fix, and we're taking steps to address it. But those are two good policy parameters that are good places to start that we're working through to, again, try to improve.
Did I read, Dr. Harrison, that the Preferred Pathways program is helping 75% or more of your students graduate without little to no debt?
Well, that's independent of preferred pathways. So the number fluctuates, but over 70% of our students graduate with no debt. And again, there's a couple of factors to that. One, our tuition rates are low. Two, many of our students are Pell eligible, and federal financial aid, because our tuition rates are low, covers most or all of the cost. And third is our students are working. 65% of our students work 20 or more hours. One of the things we're doing is working with employers to make the job they're working while they're in school meaningful, because that's not the case in a lot of cases. A lot of our students get next week's hours Thursday of this week, and that may or may not align with their class schedule and those kinds of things. But the income that they're making while they're working contributes to that as well.
And I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask if that slows down graduation rates. If 2/3 are working, does it take longer to get through school?
So let's talk about that for a minute, because again, I think it's the changing definition of what we mean by college success. One of the I'm accused by our folks of being what I just read. So I'm trying not to do that, but an article that's sticking with me is this idea of the 10-year bachelor's degree. And bear with me, because if you think about, so we've got a program with Honda, okay, which is essentially a co-op program. So students can work at Honda while they're at Columbus State, and they work 3 days a week, making really now $16 or $17 an hour. They go to school 2 days a week. They earn their associate degree in a little more time, okay, so it's not a 2-year degree, but Honda is hiring them at $60,000 a year. And then paying for their bachelor's degree. We've got a partnership with Miami University where they complete their bachelor's degree on our campus online, while again still working full-time at Honda. So instead of getting their bachelor's degree at 22, they may get it at 25 or 26, but they've been promoted 2 or 3 times. They've got no student debt, and they've been making money the whole time.
I think it's a great trade-off.
Yeah,
I
so
mean, if
you
you were
think
to
about
theoretically even double the
Yeah.
amount of time it's going to take you to get the degree, but
Yeah.
have that strength
And
no
that,
debt.
yeah, and that's why the employer element of this is important. And the idea of the 10-year bachelor's degree is really around IT, and the idea that a bachelor's degree in computer science isn't necessarily the launch point for a career in technology, but the stackable credentials that really can get you that first job. And then you think of a 10-year bachelor's degree, well, I'm 28 instead of 22, but I've been promoted 3 times, and I'm making all this money. I can afford a mortgage, right? And have no student debt. So figuring out how to bring that to scale, again, I think we've got a lot of the assets in place, but the success stories are too isolated right now.
Alex, so I started the conversation saying that this was there were folks who were less eager about the city talking about this, since we have not figured this out on a local level yet. And I thought that it is certainly fair to ask the question of political will and how we figure this out and how we use our energy to be innovative, especially as we have a young council to think outside the box and do something that would be very different. But would you specifically talk about the most unique thing that came out of the debt study in terms of what other cities are doing that you could propose?
Yeah, sure. So one really interesting stat that came out of the study, we did a sidecar survey of young people in the region, so anywhere in the Midwest, essentially. And what we found is that people were 300% more likely to want to move to Columbus if there was some sort of program, student loan debt repayment program in place, irrespective of if that was a tax credit or a forgivable loan or any of the other options out there, which I thought was really interesting as a attraction mechanism. Now we also have folks here that are already in Columbus and in the Central Ohio region that are that have student loan debt and also need help from an economic prosperity perspective. So in that case, to kind of address that use case, we studied 4 different cities that have active ongoing programs. Unfortunately, there's not one that's so complete with enough kind of trailing history that you can say like conclusively this did work or this did not work. Many of them are new within the past few years, and so it's still, the jury is still out on the effectiveness of these programs. But 2 I'll point out specifically really quick. One is a private-led program to live in downtown Detroit. It's active, I think, still today. I think they're still taking new people. Over 1,000 people have participated. I think the number is closer to 1,500 people who, if they bought a house in Detroit or even rented in Detroit, and this is anywhere in their downtown area, you could get up to $25,000 up front as a forgivable loan to go against your down payment for purchasing the home and or costs associated with closing, that type of thing. If you were renting, you could get $1,500 or $2,000 to set against any payments that needed to be made up front to open up the lease. And then over the course of 5 years, if you stayed living in the downtown Detroit area, the loans would be forgiven. You'd never have to pay them back. And the demand to get into that program, to go to a place that is already seeing an uplift and an urban revival, but to accelerate that with 1,500 people, has been looked at already as a pretty successful program. And this was led in the private market with support from the city, but not dollars from the city. The other so we thought that was an interesting program and design because it was led by the private market in this case. Mostly employers that had offices downtown that wanted more workers nearby. The other program that was really interesting is happening in Niagara Falls that I mentioned earlier. And what Niagara Falls is doing, it's a little bit smaller scale because they have a smaller tax base to begin with, but this is a public-led program. If you purchase a home, and this is really focused on the attraction side of the coin. If you came to Niagara Falls, purchased a home, or rented in a couple of key neighborhoods that they wanted to revitalize, you could get $7,000 in payment directly to any debt you have, not even student loan debt, any debt that you have, credit cards, car payments, student loans. They would pay up to $7,000 over the course of 3 years against your debt balance. This was a public-led program. The money was set aside against a slight increase to their sales tax, which is how they did it in this case. Both programs, to me, highlight a couple of opportunities for Columbus. Columbus does not have a desirability problem the way that a Detroit does. There is less of a brand, good or bad, on a national scale about Columbus. Detroit has stigma to overcome there. That provides a stronger foundation for a program that could help nudge people toward Columbus instead of other regional cities. The other thing that I think we learned is that the setting desirability aside, the amount of open jobs and opening jobs from exciting, interesting employers, large and small, in the Columbus region can help check that really important box. One of, I think, the big things that we took a step back from after we did the study was what people want above everything else is a really healthy professional career. And Columbus has many of those opportunities, more than enough. Many of our local employers are struggling to fill open roles, and especially for college degreed or close roles that are open in their businesses. So because of that, if it's really, we've found that it's really about nudging people toward home ownership or nudging people into some sort of handshake with the Columbus region to say, I'm going to be here. So it's a retention thing. I'm going to be here for 3 years. I'm committing to you for 5 years. And I think if we're serious about not just the student loan debt issue, but if we're serious about being a world-class city over the next generation in Central Ohio, we should care in really direct ways about, can we not just attract people here and they have 3 years and then they get promoted and then they're back out of town again, but can we actually get people to put down roots in Columbus? And we concluded that even though it's the much more expensive option, being able to provide some sort of home ownership credit to encourage more people buying homes, putting down roots, building families would be the most exciting place to take a program forward, but also probably the most challenging politically.
So two big concepts out of the things that you were saying. One, the private sector's role in this conversation. I know there is a conversation about a employment benefit opportunity there, but also the role that I lost my train of thought.
You said public, so are you going to
So I was going to say public, but also community development. So both of those options specifically were to help encourage some type of actual community development. And as we think about this, and we think about neighborhoods like Linden and the South Side and the Near East Side, where we're trying to make sure that there is a diverse population coming in, that there are young folks who can live, work, walk in spaces, the idea that this could be used as an economic community development tool to revitalize neighborhoods. The one question that I know within my office that when we debate this is around equity and the role that the city should play in using taxpayer dollars to focus on a smaller group of individuals who have taken out loans versus the larger community who may not even go to college, and taking actual city dollars and putting it into folks who, the argument, I'm giving the alternative that already has a higher earning ability to help pay down their loans and get them set, that there was a real equity conversation about city government dollars. And that might be somewhere where a rep can jump into. But I wanted to go to Alfred. As you, with your audience, the folks that follow Frugal Freddy, I apologize. How big of a role is student loan debt playing in their ability to live in Columbus, to thrive in Columbus? I know that you work not just with student loan debt, but encouraging folks, specifically people of color, to have a brighter financial future. But what's the role? What are you hearing from your followers as it pertains to student loan debt?
I would say the one thing, I kind of want to propose this to the panel, the one thing that I've kind of came to the conclusion is the interest rates. With it accruing daily, it's kind of hard to make progress where you're kind of throwing money in a black hole. Like you can make a $500 payment and your principal balance don't move. And I want to propose that to the panel. Like, are there any like regulations around that? But to your question, I think it's just one of those things where our generation, the millennials, are impacted the most by student loan debt, and it kind of it hinders us to progress through life, like we said with the mortgage and all that. But outside of that, I think it's one of those things where with the partnership, public-private is one of those good things that we can all come together and come up with a good plan. But I do want to ask about that interest rate, and I think that's where a lot of us are struggling with.
If you dig into the data, this is absolutely an equity issue. The $30,000 number that you cited, President Hardin, a lot of students are graduating with no debt. And those are students from wealthy families. So to get to 30,000, that's a number that is disproportionately being borne by first-generation college students and other disadvantaged groups.
And that debt is stickier with folks that don't end up graduating as well.
They got no options, right? I mean, and we see it. I mean, we are not the first choice for enough students. And we've got people that by the time they get to us, they're in such a deep financial aid hole that we can't really help them because of federal regulations, because they've made bad choices. I'll get to your interest rate point in a minute. But I think education from an equity standpoint is really important, and helping people understand what their options are. There are they're proprietary institutions. I mean, it doesn't borderline on predatory lending. It is. And it's helping, it's reaching people who are the most vulnerable and promising something that is unattainable, and then holding them accountable for the rest of their lives. And that's where the interest rate element kicks in, because you don't know that it's 7% until you've signed it, or until you get the first bill. And again, that has by far a disproportional impact on those who are the most fragile.
Again, we want to encourage folks, if you guys have questions, just raise your hand so that I can get you guys to Rep. Boggs. Kind of back to my question about where not just my staff, but the auditor and other folks have pushed back on me in terms of, not our current auditor, I won't say that, but it's a real question, and I take their point about using city dollars to pay down on the highest earning group of folks that we have in our community. I can easily argue back why that is still worth an argument, but it was interesting that from the state level, the proposition wasn't to pay down student loan debt.
Oh, no. I mean, I think what you see as policymakers at the state level is we pick winners all the time. We pick the people that we want to invest in. And in the Ohio General Assembly, that has been some of the top income earners in the state. If you look at the way that we've structured our tax systems and what we've done with, the business loophole, tax loophole is if you own your own business and you're not taxed on your first $250,000 of income. It was supposed to be for small business owners, but some of our richest and wealthiest law firms, accounting firms, businesses across the state take advantage of this. And so it really became something that has cost the state a lot, that has been to the benefit of some of our largest income earners. And so we pick winners regularly, and sometimes we pick the winners at the top. And I would argue that when you're incentivizing education and you're making education more affordable, yes, you are trying to uplift a group of people, and there could be people in that pool that would have the means and resources to otherwise still be able to attend and attain a college education. But you're also getting people into that pool that wouldn't otherwise be able to get to that level or attain that degree. And so I certainly see that as a better investment than some of the current investments that we've been able to justify throughout our state under this leadership anyways.
Another thing Craig
The more
Columbus,
pregnant I get, the more blunt I get.
to that point, the Craig Columbus Commission study did look at one of the program ideas was let's offer to businesses as an employee benefit tax credits or something like it to help as an employee benefit provide payments against student loan debt for its employees. That gets complicated. It's very pro-business. It allows them to attract and retain employees, which is great. But you're biasing the sample set, which is part of what you're asking, right? Because you're going to have folks that still aren't capable of being high income earners that still have student loan debt. So we've always kind of leaned towards solutions that would go direct to the holder of that debt, helping them purchase homes, helping them pay down those debt balances, just as an option. But you could theoretically do this, pipeline it through employers to at least give them a weapon to fight with, the way they do with health insurance and 401k investments and those types of things.
All right, so I see we have several questions popping up. I'm starting in the very back.
I'm wondering if anybody looked at ways of helping students reduce their debt by subsidizing or supporting things that they're spending their student loans on that's not academic. So, for example, if they have to use their student loans to help pay for housing, or there are some students, I know OSU has a program for students who are parents and help them if they need to get other government assistance and things like that. But there's a policy in Ohio where if you have a graduate degree or if you already have a bachelor's degree, let's say your parent at Ohio State, you can't get Title 20 to support a daycare, for example, right? So if you apply for federal or state money to pay for child care and things like that, if they see that you have a bachelor's degree, then you have to pay the full price. So then you have students who may be first generation, they're also parents, having to pay $180 a week for child care that could have been taken care of, but policy says that because you have this degree, you can't. So I'm wondering, has anybody looked at other ways in which to reduce that, the way folks are using their student loans?
Thank you for asking that question. I mean, we're looking at it, but we don't have a solution. I can tell you that I spent my morning on that because you're describing a lot of our students, and the debt that a lot of our students take on is to pay food or pay for food and rent or childcare, which is a monthly expense that they're paying on for the next 30 years. So that's something we're really trying to work through. We've got community assets in place to be able to do that, but the problem is those are currently organized around agencies, not around people. So we're working, this is a longer term play, on figuring out how to better align those so that we're not taking a student who's already got to be on 4 COTA buses and sending them somewhere else to get help when they have both housing needs and child care needs. So we don't have a long-term solution, but we're kind of working through that. The other piece, and you alluded to it, is the benefits cliff, because we have, if you're familiar with that, we have students who could make more money and help get them out of that hole. But the $1 an hour that some of our students have to give up, that would make them ineligible for public benefits that include child care subsidies and those kinds of things. And that's a tightrope that our students are having to walk on their own. So the conversations we're having is to have the United Way, have the Community Shelter Board, have Mid-Ohio Food Bank, have Franklin County Job and Family Services will have a case manager on Columbus State's campus starting in January to help sort that through, so that we're bringing help to students instead of making students go elsewhere for help.
In back to Nick.
Has there been any studies, and I'm sure I haven't because I've read a couple articles, but that you could talk to, what is the economic impact of student loan, say, forgiveness, right? So how much of the 1.5 trillion is federal loans, and if it was, say, magically forgiven, which every day I pray like somebody hits a delete button somewhere, but it hasn't happened yet. So what is the actual economic impact and benefit, direct benefit to the overall economy? Because we talk about this, oh, we just forgive it, where does that money go? So has there been studies done on what that economic benefit impact would be?
Can we look at that, Alex?
Yeah, so it's a part of the, thanks for the fro.
I'm sorry, fro.
So we looked at, as part of the student loan debt study, Detroit, kicking off their program, had looked at essentially trying to tease out the direct economic impact of a forgivable loan for home ownership. And it's tough to do this in a really direct sense because there's so many factors and variables at play. But what they came up with is they thought an investment of around $25 million in forgivable loans would yield close to $125 million over the course of a decade. So that was the ROI that they measured, saying that just retaining 1,500 people in Detroit, helping them keep the jobs that they had come to Detroit to have in the downtown area, reinvesting their money, both building equity in homes to support Detroit, but also support the local transportation options and patronize the local restaurants, et cetera, would add up to $125 million of direct, otherwise non-existent economic impact. So if we just use kind of a 5x return on the dollar as a benchmark, there's at least something there that attempts to measure the two against each other.
First statement, Jordan.
So a few things. So one of the reasons why we looked at housing on the commission study was trying to solve for multiple issues at once. Like if we already have a high, monthly payment on debt, you're therefore unlikely to be able to put a down payment on a house. We want more people to live here, but you combine with increasing cost of living, the lack of housing options kind of in Columbus, coupled with that you still have to pay for transportation costs here and there's a package here that's really expensive. So how do you cut down on both of those? One is we could go through policy or through subsidies to help address that, but I also think there's just an education gap. And I wonder what the role could be for public entities or higher ed institutions or the community post-graduation, because oftentimes, like you said, Kristen, we didn't know the decisions we made when we took on this debt. We didn't know the consequence. At the time, it was our only option. And then, 4 or 5 years out of college, you're just, it's crippling, right? You're like, how is this still like a cost I'm gonna face for the next several decades? So, and then you have people on social media reaching out to you to be your wealth advisors that are just paying you their funds, right? And there's no non-biased financial education. So I think this is the best question to Freddie, but where's the gap when it comes to financial literacy in young adults? And is there a role for the local community to play in solving
I think
that?
there is, and that's the one thing I was going to kind of propose is that the one thing that I've realized is education. And education can be many forms, and self-education, like one thing that has helped me a lot is budgeting, and I think that's something that's not taught in schools anymore. And I think that's where we can kind of start at is having financial wellness classes and teaching kids at a very young age how to manage money, how to budget, how to save, how to invest. And I think at the core root, I think that's where it kind of stems from. And then when we get to that point of having that education, we can, as adults or millennials, we can make a sound decision on our economic future. Or if we don't have to go to college anymore. So if it's getting a certification and not going to college, I think that's a viable option. But to your point, I really think it is the education on the personal side that can help. And then, with the city schools or Columbus State, I think those are one of the opportunities out there to educate the young people because they don't know. And you only know what you know. So and I think that's a good point that you pointed out.
And I think we had in my family, just personally, the first real conversation about interest rates when I made my first payment, not when we signed the loan or signed up for the loan to get it 4 years earlier, but the first time that we really talked was when I realized that I had, in one case, a 11% interest rate on a very large loan. And I'm first generation, but we weren't. We had tools if we would have known to even ask the question or thought to really dig deeper. First table, yes.
Sure. So first of all, I just wanted to compliment you for having this open conversation about debt, which for many people is a 4-letter word. So absolutely, and it's one of those things that really impacts people. It cannot be discharged even in bankruptcy. It's a burden to people's real freedom in life to take risks, to start businesses, to pursue their passions, to make the most of their life, right? So it's important to have the conversation, yes, from a policy perspective, to illuminate people from, now that there's other options like community colleges, but I would say for those who are struggling with that issue today, I would say that, Frugal Freddie here can make the most impact and, community of financial bloggers to really help people make those lifestyle choices that are going to help them through that. I mean, we're kind of, fooled in a way. We're exposed to 5,000 brand images a day. Everything is telling us to consume, to buy this, we need that. But at its essence, when you boil the water out of the pot, what we need is food, shelter, water, transportation, love and belonging, and meaning and purpose in our lives. And that's about it. Everything else is extraneous. So at some level, I feel that there is a disconnect, between the city's interest and maybe individual interests to get rid of that debt. So for example, what may make sense is to share a room or share an apartment with 4 rooms and pay $200 a piece, as opposed to buying a home with property taxes and maintenance and repairs and utilities and all those burdens. To really focus in on those choices first, get that free, create that freedom. So I would say in terms of what people can do and organizations, I would say partner with financial bloggers who can share that message. Not the 55-year-old guy from Morgan Stanley who comes into your classroom, but people who've lived it, who want to share that journey. And there's this whole, and what's possible is incredible. There's this whole movement called FIRE, Financial Independence, Retire Early, out of Denver and so on. And I can say for our family, It's allowed us to buy a house without a mortgage, to be in a position to retire by the time our youngest kid starts kindergarten. And that is possible through those daily decisions. So yeah, that's something I would encourage us, partner with those bloggers who can relate to people, to students, to young professionals in a real personal way and share their stories. And I think that's the way to make the most impact today.
You have something?
I didn't pay her, y'all. So, but to her point, it really does come down to that. And we're not debt free yet, but it is a freeing experience when you pay off a student loan. And I think the policy, all that stuff is great. But to your point, it comes down to the mechanics of it. And if it's doing different things to minimize that debt, it's just the sky is the limit. I think what you're saying, is good, but it's impacting us daily, and we're making hard decisions to okay, should I pay this or should I pay my student loans? I don't think society was designed that way, to always think about student loans in that sense. It's to help us to propel, not burden us.
I just want to add real quickly, I think you touched on a really interesting convergence of issues where, from a personal standpoint, you want to live debt-free, be financially healthy, be able to make the consumer decisions that you want to in a responsible way. From the state standpoint or the city standpoint, we need consumers. We need you to go out and have those frivolous purchases and buy that extra round of beers at the So there is this really conflicting purpose for us to sort of address these issues. And obviously everything, in the perfect world, everyone would feel, a balance. Right. But in reality, though, what our local economy needs are big spenders. Right. And so I think that you kind of touch on this issue of how there is sort of a conflicting interest from the individual to the city, to the state, to the,
I see 3 folks, I see 4 folks. So we'll do 1 in the back, 3, and then 4. And then we'll get to you, Brooklyn. So we'll start here.
Okay, President Hart, one of the things you had mentioned in regards to student debt was wages. So as I'm sure you know, since the 1980s, property debts have risen while wages have remained stagnant.
Yeah.
So I guess my question would be to you, President Hart, what can you do on the local level, on the city level, President Wall, what can you do on the state level to address the issue of wages and kind of have the public sector and the private sector understand this is directly correlated to student debt, and what we do to overcome that and address this issue so that way we can, kind of legally that work as well.
No, I think that is a great point. That's why I specifically asked what role, especially in Columbus, where we have a 3.8% unemployment rate, but a third of our population lives in poverty. So that means that we specifically don't have a job problem. We have a wage issue in our community. Just this last Monday, the council passed a $15 minimum requirement for all of our incentive packages. So if we are going to incentivize and encourage you to bring your job to Columbus with tax incentives, that job has to be $15 an hour wage. And the truth is, $15 an hour is not even the number anymore. In Columbus, it's $17 or $18 an hour to actually be able to live and pay for a 2-bedroom apartment and have 1 child. So it's something that we have to continue to talk about, to focus on specifically, and not get too enamored in the numbers that say that we're doing okay in that space around job growth and job creation. I think wages play a huge role in a lot of our issues around housing and others as well. Rep, do you have?
Yeah, and I want to commend our city for creatively coming up with a way to, try and address this wage issue because the state has done everything they possibly can to prevent cities from having local control over raising the minimum wage. And so kudos to you guys for taking this on in a creative way. I would also add that I don't think you can talk about wages without talk about housing costs, because whenever this country has seen a rise in wages, whether it's, when we went through the Industrial Revolution or we went through other minimum wage increases, sometimes the biggest beneficiaries of those become their landlords. And so if we're not in tandem thinking about how do we keep housing affordable while we're increasing wages, we're not going to see the progress that we really want to see. So I think that those issues are really married together, and sometimes we don't think about it that way. But no, I certainly agree that, you know, we have to, especially in Central Ohio, where, as Shannon noted, you know, our living wage is escalating over $15 an hour. It's very different from where my colleagues come from. Majority of my colleagues come from rural areas where they can very nicely live on $11 or $12 an hour, and that makes the debate a very difficult one to have down there.
Go in the back, Doug.
Sure. So I'm a product of community colleges. Because of the 3 community colleges, including Columbus State, that I was able to take classes, I could graduate from my dream university. How can we, as a community, both in the public and private sector, encourage more students to utilize our community college system, particularly Columbus State, to minimize that financial burden? I mean, I graduated with less than half of what would have been if I had gone straight through my university.
I was hoping you all would jump in and be part of the team here, because I've kind of got a bias. But I think we need to have that conversation as a community. You know, I talked about my Florida experience. I was at the University of Central Florida. No jokes about national championships and those kinds of things, but UCF has more undergraduate students than Ohio State does. And more than half of their bachelor's degree every year go to community college transfers. And the state, and a big part of that is due to the policies and practices we put in place while I was there, but part of it's state policy too. And if you look at national debt data, the state of Florida is one of the best states with regard to both the number of students who take on debt and the amount that they take on, and Ohio's in the bottom 20%. And a big part of it is what I call the soccer field focus group. It's helping students and families understand that it not only is it the same bachelor's degree. Let's take Ohio State as an example. It's the same bachelor's degree. When you walk across Ohio Stadium and get your degree, if you took the first 2 years at Columbus State, it's the same bachelor's degree at a lot less money. And it's hard for people to get their heads around that. We're chipping away at it. And again, OSU is deep at the table. This is a big priority for President Drake. He and I met yesterday on it. So it's something that we've got kind of a shared vision around it. But we've got a lot of history to overcome. There's still a lot of guidance counselors in schools that remember Ohio State when they were the safety school, and they're assuming that everybody's getting into OSU now. And it's something that I welcome. I welcome the bloggers and those who are more directly involved in some of these kinds of things, because working through the traditional methods, frankly, aren't working. You know, we work with guidance counselors. We share data and those kinds of things. We're chipping away at it. But I think it's got to be a community effort, and could be a place where the kind of the bully pulpit of public policy could hold that up. Again, we've made some progress from a state policy standpoint with some 2+2 legislation and College Credit Plus, as I mentioned. But the state of Ohio is overbuilt with regard to universities. When you pull in, especially private universities, we've got more than we need with a shrinking population. Florida had the opposite problem, which created I think some entrepreneurial approaches in that regard, because the population was growing much more rapidly than higher ed capacity, so it had to be a systemic approach.
All right, we'll go here, then we'll go back to the back, and then we'll end with.
So I heard like employee benefit kind of brought up a couple times. Has there been any other like models where they're structuring kind of debt forgiveness like a 401k where it's like a match instead of like a lump sum on like a deferred and no tax basis?
We'll talk about about that?
Yeah, so great question. So we didn't essentially get to that inside the scope of the study that the Craig Columbus Commission did. However, there are at minimum a handful of startups that exist in the financial tech space designed to do specifically what you just said, provide either through an employee benefit or direct to a consumer, not just lending options, but structured investment style products to help you pay down interest and principal on student loan debt specifically. So there are technology and innovation-based sources that are being attempted. I think the tricky part where we are today is that the student loan debt balance is growing by, a few $100 billion a year, and these tools are still new and unproven, or at least small in scope. So it's tough to say, like, everybody should be going to this specific tool or using this technique to pay down.
To that point, I think Wells Fargo's doing that. Like, whatever percentage you were going to contribute to your 401k, they just pay it towards the student loan, and then they match it. And then I think you just have to do like a 5-year commitment with the company, which I would do that in a heartbeat. But I think some companies are kind of hesitant to do that because, a lot of people are impacted by that. So that, money's involved and you got to pay more and all that. So I think companies should start considering that, because I think our generation is looking at jobs like, how can you benefit me? How much I can benefit you? So it's kind of a give situation.
Similar to consumer financial literacy gaps, there's also an employer financial literacy gap. Why does this matter? Why should I offer to my employees?
I agree.
So one of the common things that I'm hearing is financial literacy. Do we have any plans to educate our students prior to the collegiate level? So for example, high school, right? That's the best target to understand credit, money management, investing, things of that nature. We have any plans to standardize that. So for example, all seniors will have to take a financial literacy class prior to graduation.
And I thought it was interesting because Dr. Harrison, when you were speaking, you were talking about the College Credit Plus program. And so I was thinking as you were saying that, well, really the conversation about student loan debt really is starting. It needs to start in the public school or in the school system.
Yeah, and my experience is that's happening, but it's happening inconsistently.
There has been legislation addressed at the State House level regarding mandating financial literacy classes be part of the curriculum adopted by all high schools across Ohio. And I'm not sure what the status of that legislation is. It's been percolating around for quite some time, and I want to say that they have now involved the Ohio Department of Education to come up with something of what that would look like. And I don't know if that has happened yet or where in the process exactly it is. But I will say that, I am confident in saying that there are members on our education committee that have been talking about, finding ways to create financial literacy as a component for graduation in some form or fashion.
If I could just add to that, though, I would say push and make sure that student loan or just loan debt is a part of that conversation, because financial literacy, at least when I took it when I was in middle school, was, how to balance a checkbook. And stuff like that. But it doesn't tell you like what an interest rate is and what that is. So make sure that we keep that as a part of it as well.
So for our last question, I want to end back here with probably our youngest person who's a part of our conversation, who maybe is upstream on this.
My name's Watchman Cole. I actually do College Credit Plus at Columbus State. So I was wondering if how do I make sure that I stay out of debt? Because I don't have any.
I didn't hear the last part of your question. How do you make sure what?
I stay out of debt.
Some strategies maybe for someone like.
How many classes are you taking?
Right this semester I took 2. Next semester I'm taking 3. But by the time I graduate, I'll have 45 credit hours.
So congratulations, first of all. You're off to yeah. What high school do you go to, may I ask?
Columbus North International High School.
Good for you. What year are you?
I'm a junior.
Okay. So you're gonna graduate with 1.5 years of college under your belt. So the first step is make sure whatever college you choose gives you credit for 1.5 years of college. because credit is one thing, credit towards a degree is another. So you got to make sure that you're going into second semester sophomore year, 45 hours is your number, and ask the admissions counselor that question, because colleges will look at that College Credit Plus information differently. And part of that then is kind of knowing what you want to do. Do you know what you want to major in?
Yes. I want to major in political science.
Okay. So that's great, because we need you out here, so hurry. But that should give you some degrees of freedom and some options with regard to, do you know where you want to go to get your bachelor's degree?
I'm looking at Ford, Denison, Howard, Michigan, and OSU.
So start those conversations now. We could help you with Denison and Ohio State to make sure that you graduate from high school with a clear plan. And with your record, chances are there's going to be scholarship money available too. Now's the time to start those conversations. So you've taken the great first step. It sounds like you've got a good path. Let's, as a team, work to keep you on that path, and our folks will be happy to help.
You can check one of those schools off the list.
Well, can we give ourselves a round of applause for being here this afternoon? I want to thank this panel, Representative Kristen Boggs, President David Harrison, Alex Frohmeyer, financial blogger Alfred Wilson, for the insight, and not just the insight, but the work that is actually being done. I think that I appreciate the space to have the conversation, but I also like a little bit of the political push to continue to think outside the box and create out-of-the-box solutions to a problem that we're going to continue to face. To our partners, the Create Columbus Commission, the Columbus Urban League Young Professionals, and the Columbus Young Professionals, we say thank you. It's your members that are driving this conversation, and a lot are mostly affected by this. And so we're just grateful for everybody giving their Saturday. On behalf of Columbus City Council, we're wishing everybody a happy holiday and a happy new year. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you. And to be honest, I'd say that.
Thank you, sir. Really, really appreciate it.